I'm often asked, what are the primary things that keep men from talking about their sexual trauma? My experience tells me that one of the main issues is shame. I have never had a client walk into my office to address a sexual trauma history without the word shame being a part of the early conversation. And shame, of course, drives secrecy. And secrecy reciprocally feeds shame. It's very important to understand how these two powerful factors work together to inhibit and prevent healing and recovery. Sexual trauma can happen to anyone, regardless of age, gender, or background, but for men, there are unique barriers to seeking help and addressing the trauma. One of the most significant of these barriers is just that, shame. As a culture, we often talk about guilt and shame as nearly interchangeable concepts. However, shame is so much more toxic than guilt. Guilt is feeling bad about something you've done. Shame is not just about feeling bad for what happened, it's about feeling bad for who you are. For male survivors, this often manifests as feeling like they've been violated in a way that goes against expectations of masculinity. In many cultures, men are taught to be strong, stoic, and in control. They're told they should never show vulnerability, never be weak, certainly never be a victim. Most of us grew up hearing, "Boys don't cry, be a man, stop acting like a girl." Messages like this create an overwhelming sense of shame and just reinforce the secrecy. Survivors may feel as though their masculinity has been stolen or tainted, as though they're no longer real men. They might ask themselves, how could I have let this happen? What does it say about me? This is not just a feeling of being ashamed of the event itself, but of the very person they are, their identity. For many male survivors, the shame is compounded by the secrecy they feel they have to maintain. And this secrecy isn't just about keeping the abuse hidden from others. It's often about keeping it hidden from themselves as well, because addressing the trauma would force them to confront that deep sense of shame. In many cases, male survivors struggle to even recognize the abuse as abuse. They might question their own experiences or feel that they allowed it to happen. This is especially true if the trauma happened at a young age or if it was perpetrated by someone that they trusted. The internal dialogue often sounds like this. Maybe I brought this on myself. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it wasn't really abuse. This sense of confusion makes it even harder to break the silence. In addition to internal secrecy, there's also the external pressure to remain silent. Male survivors often face a significant social stigma. One of the few concepts that comes up as frequently as shame in my work as survivors is the fear of judgment. Survivors expect others to believe that male victims of sexual trauma are weak, unmanly, or even less credible than female survivors. And many times they believe these things themselves. This stigma silences many men, preventing them from coming forward and sharing their experiences. Men are often told, either explicitly or implicitly, that their pain is not valid. They should just get over it. The reality is that many male survivors experience the same profound trauma, fear, and psychological scars as female survivors, but they rarely receive the same level of support or validation. The belief that real men don't talk about their trauma creates a chilling silence that can last years or even decades, honestly, in most cases. This secrecy feeds into a cycle that's incredibly difficult to break. It's a cycle where the survivor feels isolated, misunderstood, trapped. They may feel that no one believes them or no one will care if they speak up. And the longer the secrecy persists, the harder it is to find a way out. But here's the thing. Healing is possible, and it starts with breaking the silence. For male survivors, it's critical to create safe spaces where they can share their experiences without fear of judgment or invalidation. It's about shifting the conversation from one of shame and secrecy to one of understanding and support. We need to challenge the outdated and harmful notion that men can't be victims of sexual trauma. Men deserve the same compassion, understanding, and support as every other survivor. This is why I am such an enthusiastic advocate for group therapy work for male survivors. Over the years, I've seen men who were absolutely terrified to speak of their trauma grow into men who can share their story of abuse, support others who want to do the same, and create a community of survivors where they feel supported, valued, and understood. The first step in healing often begins when the survivor breaks their silence, when they find someone to talk to. Sometimes that's a spouse, sometimes it's a trusted friend, often it's a therapist like myself. I can't tell you how many times I've had a client say to me, I have never said this out loud to anyone before they share their story of abuse. While the process of breaking your silence can be really challenging, it's definitely a critical one. Therapy, support groups, and healthy relationships can provide male survivors with the resources they need to confront the shame and the secrecy that have controlled their lives for so long. But we also need society to change. We need to create environments where men can feel safe expressing vulnerability, where they can say, I was hurt and I need some help. So to all the survivors who might be listening out there, know this, your experience matters. Your pain is real, and you do not have to carry the weight of shame and secrecy alone. There is support out there, and you are not defined by the trauma that you've suffered. We all have a part to play in helping break the silence. The more we talk about male sexual trauma, the more we can shift that narrative, reduce the shame, and create a world where all survivors, regardless of gender, feel supported and validated.